You fix it? Even the factory said it's unfixable.
Oh? But I can fix it in just 90 seconds.
The most expensive car in the room would not start. It sat under 4 spotlights at the center of a ballroom that had been built that evening to look like the inside of a Bugatti Chiron. Midnight blue over a blue so dark it read as black until the light moved across it. $4 million of hand-built machine positioned on a rotating platform so that 300 of the wealthiest people in the state could admire it from every angle before they bid on it. It had not moved in 2 hours. Not the platform. The platform still turned. The engine. Vivian Hale stood beside it in a gown that fit her the way clothes fit people who pay others to make sure their clothes fit. And she watched 2 technicians who had flown in from the factory that morning close a laptop and shake their heads. And she felt the specific cold that arrives when a woman who has controlled everything realizes there is a thing in front of her she cannot control. "What do you mean?" Vivian said. "You can't fix it." The lead technician, gray-haired, precise, a man named Anton Keller, who had spent 26 years inside the most exacting automotive engineering on Earth, chose his words the way such men do. The diagnostic is reading an internal powertrain fault. To confirm and repair it properly, the engine has to come out. That is days of work, possibly weeks, for sourcing. He paused. "Tonight. I'm sorry. The car will not run tonight. 300 people. Cameras. A live auction in 90 minutes for a children's hospital. With this car is the reason half the room had come. And it would not start." That was when a voice came from the edge of the crowd, quiet, not raised. The voice of a man who had not been invited to speak and knew it. "It's not an internal fault." Vivian turned. A man in a borrowed gray suit stood just past the rope line. Not a guest, exactly, or not the kind of guest the others were. Beside him, holding his hand, a boy of about 8 in a clip-on tie, watching everything with enormous, serious eyes. Vivian looked at the suit, at the shoes that did not match the suit, at the man's hands, which were the hands of someone who worked with them. "And who are you?" Vivian said, "to tell the factory it's wrong." The man didn't answer that. He said, "I can fix it." A ripple of laughter moved through the people close enough to hear. Vivian's jaw tightened. She was not a cruel woman, but she was a frightened one in that moment, and frightened people reach for whatever makes them feel large. She said, loud enough now for the room, even the factory said it's unfixable. The man in the gray suit looked at the car, then at Vivian, then for just a second down at his son. He said, "Oh, but I can fix it." In 90 seconds. The room went quiet. Anton Keller, the factory engineer, looked at this stranger with the expression of a master watching an amateur step toward a cliff. And he reached into his pocket, and he took out his phone, and he opened the stopwatch because if a man was going to embarrass himself, Anton at least believed in measuring it accurately. He said, 90 seconds. "I'll count." The man in the gray suit knelt down beside $4 million. Vivian Hale had built her life on a single belief, and the belief was this: the best costs more, and what costs more is safe. She had not been born believing it. She had earned the belief the way she had earned everything painfully, and out of a hole. She had grown up in a town that made things until it didn't. The daughter of a man who fixed refrigerators for a living, and who had told Vivian, more than once, and without meaning it as cruelty, that girls like her didn't get to be the ones who decided things. They got to be the ones who showed up when the deciders called. Vivian had been 15 the last time her father said it, and she had decided with the cold, total decisiveness that only a humiliated 15-year-old can manage that she was going to spend her life proving it wrong. She had started a delivery company with a leased van and a phone. She had built it, over 22 years, into a logistics network that moved freight across 9 states, that employed 1,100 people, that had made Vivian Hale wealthy in the way that changes how a person is treated in every room she enters for the rest of her life. And the whole time, underneath the wealth, the girl from the town that made things until it didn't had carried one secret fear, that she didn't actually know anything, that she was a saleswoman who had gotten lucky, that the engineers and the experts and the credentialed people could all see, the way you can see a stain, that Vivian Hale had no degree, no training, no real expertise, only nerve and timing, and the willingness to work until she dropped. So she bought certainty. She hired the most credentialed people. She bought the most expensive version of everything, not because she could tell the difference, she often could not, but because the price tag was a kind of armor. If it cost the most, no one could say she'd cut a corner. If the factory said it, then Vivian Hale, who knew nothing, could not be blamed for being wrong. The Bugatti was the purest expression of this. She had bought it 8 months ago, a rare Chiron with a documented history, and she had not bought it because she loved cars. She could not, if pressed, have explained how the engine worked beyond the number of cylinders, which she had memorized for conversations. She had bought it because it was, by the only measure she fully trusted, the best, the most, the top. A $4 million receipt that said, "I am not the girl from that town anymore." And then her foundation had planned the gala. St. Clair's Children's Hospital, Vivian's signature cause, the one charity she gave to without being asked, for reasons she did not discuss at parties, was building a new cardiac wing, and the gala was meant to fund it. And somewhere in the planning a clever person had said, what if the centerpiece of the auction is the Chiron itself? What if Vivian Hale donated the most expensive thing she owned, live, on stage, and let the room bid? She had said yes immediately. She had pictured it, the car turning under the lights, the bidding climbing into the millions, her name and the hospital's name in the same sentence in every story written about the night. Not vanity, or not only vanity. She believed in the hospital, but she also believed, in the part of herself she never looked at directly, that this was the night the girl from the town would finally, completely, stop being that girl. The car had been delivered to the ballroom at noon. It had started fine at noon. At 4 o'clock, when the staging crew moved it onto the rotating platform and a technician went to reposition it, it had shuddered, thrown a cascade of warning lights across its dashboard, and gone silent, dead silent. No crank, no cough, nothing. Vivian had not panicked. Vivian did what Vivian always did when something broke. She reached for the most expensive solution available. She called the factory. 2 technicians were on a chartered flight within the hour, because that is what $4 million and a panicked billionaire can arrange. They arrived at 6. They plugged in their equipment. They frowned at their screens, and at 7:40, 90 minutes before the auction, Anton Keller had closed his laptop and told Vivian Hale the one thing Vivian Hale had spent her entire life paying not to hear, that the best money could buy could not fix it tonight, that it was, for the purposes of this evening, unfixable. And Vivian had stood there in her perfect gown, 300 guests beginning to murmur, the cameras beginning to turn her way, feeling the old hole open under her feet, and into that silence, from the edge of the room, a man in a borrowed suit had said, "It's not an internal fault." Sam Mercer had not wanted to come to the gala. He had come for Leo. 8 years old, Leo Mercer, with a scar down the center of his chest that he was not embarrassed by, because his father had taught him, early and on purpose, to think of it as a door, rather than a wound, the place where the surgeons at St. Clair's had gone in, when Leo was 4, and rebuilt a heart that had been put together wrong before he was born. They had nearly lost him. Sam did not let himself remember the details often, but they lived in him the way old injuries live in a body, available in the cold, the night in the waiting room, the surgeon's face. The 11 days after, when Sam had not left the building, had slept in a plastic chair, had learned the names of every nurse on the cardiac floor and what their kids were named and what they took in their coffee. Because when you cannot do anything else for the person you love, you can at least learn the names of the people who can. St. Clair's had saved Leo's life. And then St. Clair's had written off the part of the bill that the insurance Sam had, right up until the month before Leo got sick, had stopped covering. They had not had to. They had done it because the social worker had looked at a single father who had lost his job and his marriage in the same year, and decided that this family had been hit enough. So when the letter came inviting Sam and Leo to the gala not as donors, God knew, but as a family helped by St. Clair's, to be honored briefly from the stage, so that the room full of wealthy people could see what their money did, Sam had wanted to throw it away. Leo had wanted to go. They fixed me, Leo had said, with the flat logic of an 8-year-old. I want to say thank you, and I want to see the building they're going to build, so other kids don't have to wait. So Sam had borrowed a suit from his neighbor, who was 2 inches taller, and he had bought Leo a clip-on tie, and they had come. Sam Mercer had not always worked out of a strip mall. For 11 years, he had been a powertrain controls engineer, the discipline that lives at the intersection of mechanical engineering and software. The people who write and tune the systems that decide, thousands of times a second, what a high-performance engine should do. He had been good at it, better than good. He had worked for a supplier that built engine management and sensor integration systems for some of the most demanding manufacturers on Earth, the kind of work where a single line of logic, written wrong, could turn a masterpiece into a brick. He understood engines the way a doctor understands a body, not as a collection of parts, but as a system that communicated. That told you what was wrong if you knew its language. And the language Sam knew best was the language of the failures, the rare, ugly, edge case faults that almost never happened, and that, when they did, fooled everyone. Because the diagnostic computers were written by people who had never seen them. He had found one of those failures years ago, a particular sensor cheap, common, a component that cost almost nothing that, when it corroded or its connector worked loose under sustained vibration, did not simply fail in a clean and obvious way. It failed in a way that flooded the engine management system with contradictory signals, a cascade of phantom faults that the diagnostic software, following its decision tree, escalated all the way up to its most severe verdict: internal mechanical failure, powertrain compromised. The computer, in other words, looked at a $30 problem and screamed that the engine was destroyed. Sam had written it up, a full technical report. He had recommended a change to the diagnostic logic, a simple check that would catch the phantom cascade before it triggered the catastrophic verdict, and a more robust connector for the sensor. He had been told it was a non-issue. The failure was too rare to justify the cost. The report was thanked and filed. 18 months later, there had been a restructuring, the kind where the people who said yes to everything kept their jobs, and the people who wrote uncomfortable reports did not. Sam had been 40, with a 4-year-old who had just been diagnosed with a heart that needed rebuilding, and a wife, Dana, who, in the long grinding year that followed, had discovered that she had married an engineer and could not stay married to a man who fixed cars in a strip mall between a vape shop and a laundromat. She had said, near the end, the thing Sam never repeated to anyone: "This isn't who I thought you were." She had not understood that it was exactly who he was, that the man tuning a stranger's transmission for $200 on a Saturday was the same man who had tuned engines worth more than the building. The work had not changed. Only the room it happened in had changed, and the room was the only thing Dana had ever been able to see. She had moved to another state. She called Leo on Sundays. Sam had built Mercer Automotive out of nothing, the way the only people who know how to build out of nothing build slowly, honestly, one trustworthy job at a time. He kept his old technical references on a shelf above the workbench. He never stopped reading. He still knew, cold, the language of the systems he had once helped write. And on a Tuesday night, in a borrowed gray suit, standing at the edge of a ballroom with his son's hand in his, Sam Mercer had watched a $4 million car throw a cascade of warning lights and go dead, and he had watched two factory technicians plug in a laptop, and he had heard the verdict before they said it, because he had written the report that predicted it. 8 years ago. The one nobody read. They had stood at the back for the first hour, Sam and Leo, the way people stand when they know they're guests in a country that isn't theirs. A woman from the foundation had found them, kind and harried, and explained that the program had been pushed back. There was a situation with the car, and could they please just enjoy themselves until then? She had handed Leo a sparkling cider and a champagne flute, which had made his entire night, and disappeared. Sam had watched the situation with the car, the way a doctor watches an ambulance unload. He saw the dashboard light up and die. He saw the staging crew's faces change. He saw the phone calls, the waiting. And then at 6 o'clock, he saw the two men arrive with the hard cases, and he knew before they opened them what was inside, because he had carried cases exactly like them for 11 years. "What's wrong with the blue car?" Leo asked. "I'm not sure yet," Sam said. Which was true, in the way that a thing can be true and a lie at the same time. He had a suspicion. He was not going to act on a suspicion in a room like this. A man like him did not walk up to a woman like that and offer an opinion. He had learned that the hard way, 8 years ago. So he watched. He watched Anton Keller, and Sam knew the type instantly. Knew it the way you know your own reflection. The careful, competent engineer doing careful, competent work, run the diagnostic, and frown, and run it again. He watched the laptop screen too far away to read, but close enough to understand. The technician was getting a verdict he didn't like and didn't quite trust, and he was running it again, because some part of 26 years of experience was telling him the verdict was too big for the symptom. But the computer is the computer, and when the most severe verdict comes up, and 300 people are waiting, and the woman who signs your invoice is standing 2 feet away in a gown that costs more than your car, you do not bet your reputation on a hunch against your own equipment. So at 7:40, Anton Keller closed the laptop and told Vivian Hale the truth, as his instruments had given it to him. Internal fault. Engine out. Not tonight. And Sam watched the billionaire's face. He had expected to see arrogance, and he saw it, but underneath it, for one unguarded second, before Vivian rebuilt the mask, Sam saw something he recognized far better than arrogance. He saw someone looking down a hole. He saw fear wearing a couture gown. That was the thing that moved him. Not the car, not the room. The look on the face of a powerful woman discovering that her power had a wall in it. Sam knew that look. He had worn it in a waiting room at St. Clair's, watching surgeons walk in and out of a door with his 4-year-old behind it, understanding for the first time in his life that there were rooms his will could not enter. "Dad," Leo said quietly. He had been watching too, in the way Leo watched everything, with that grave attention that had unsettled adults since he was a baby. "They said it's broken, and they can't fix it. That's what they said." Leo looked up at him. "But you fix everything," Leo said. Not as a question, as a fact about the universe, stated by an 8-year-old who had spent his whole life watching his father make dead things run. And Sam looked at his son, at the boy whose heart had been rebuilt in this hospital's name, in a building paid for by rooms exactly like this one, and he felt the 8 years of swallowed certainty rise up in him. And he understood that there are moments when staying quiet stops being humility and starts being a different kind of cowardice. He took Leo's hand. He stepped over the rope line. And into the silence after the factory's verdict, Sam Mercer said the 4 words that turned the whole room toward him. "It's not an internal fault." The seconds after were the ones Vivian Hale would replay for the rest of her life. She turned. She saw the borrowed suit, the unmatched shoes, the working hands, the small boy. Every instinct Vivian had built over 40 years told her what this was. A nobody, a nothing. A man from the kind of town Vivian had clawed her way out of, presuming to know better than the factory. "And who are you?" Vivian said. "To tell the factory, it's wrong." Sam didn't defend himself. There was a strange peace in it. He had spent 8 years preparing arguments for rooms like this, and now that he was in one, he found he didn't need them. "I can fix it," he said. The laughter from the nearby guests was not loud. It didn't need to be. Sam had heard it before, in a divorce lawyer's office, in the eyes of customers who came into his shop and asked, doubtfully, if he was sure he knew about European cars. It was the laughter of people who had decided what kind of man you were before you opened your mouth. And Vivian, frightened, exposed, reaching for the thing that made her feel large, said it. Loud, for the room. Even the factory said it's unfixable. Sam looked at the car. He looked at the woman. He looked down, once, at Leo. And he said it. "Oh, but I can fix it." In 90 seconds, he had not planned the number. It came out of him from the place where the report lived. The 8-year-old certainty. The knowledge that the fix for this exact failure, once you knew where to look, which the computer would never tell you, was not complicated. It was not even hard. It was just known. To one man in the room. Anton Keller took out his phone, opened the stopwatch. He was not mocking. Sam could see that. The factory man's curiosity had finally overruled his caution. Some part of him wanted to be wrong about the verdict, and here was a stranger offering to prove it. 90 seconds, Anton said. "I'll count." Sam knelt down beside $4 million, and every person in that ballroom, 300 of them, leaned in to watch a man in a borrowed suit make a fool of himself. Sam did not touch the engine first. This was the thing that Anton Keller, watching with his stopwatch, noticed immediately, and it was the first crack in 26 years of certainty. An amateur, a faker, a man bluffing in front of a crowd, would have done something dramatic and immediate, would have grabbed for the engine cover, would have performed fixing the car. Sam Mercer asked a question. When it died, he said not to Vivian, to the staging crew, to the man who'd been repositioning it, what was happening. Was it being moved? Was it on the platform? Being pushed onto the platform, the crew member said. It rolled over the lip. There's a steel lip, and it kind of jolted. And then all the lights came on, and it just stopped. Sam nodded once, like a man whose suspicion had just been handed a confession. "Clock's running," Anton said quietly. He had started it. Sam reached into the engine bay, and he did not go to the engine. The Chiron's W16 is one of the most complex production engines ever built. 16 cylinders, 4 turbochargers, an artwork of intention, and Sam walked his hand straight past all of it, to a place along the side, low, near a bracket, a connector, and a ground point that lived exactly where vibration would find them, exactly where a hard jolt over a steel lip would shake something loose that had been corroding quietly for who knew how long. "Your computer," Sam said, working as he talked, fingers finding the connector by feel because he had found this exact connector 100 times on 100 lesser cars, is reading a symptom and calling it the disease. He found it. The connector had backed part way out. The ground beside it wore the dull green bloom of corrosion, months of it, maybe years. The slow chemistry that no one inspects because no one is told to inspect it. Because the report that would have told them to inspect it was thanked and filed 8 years ago. When this connection goes intermittent, Sam said, the sensor on the other end starts sending garbage. Not nothing garbage. Contradictory signals, thousands a second. And the management system doesn't know it's a bad connection. It just sees impossible data coming from the heart of the engine, and it follows its logic all the way to the worst thing it can imagine, and it shuts everything down to protect itself, and it tells you he glanced up at Anton internal powertrain fault. Anton Keller's mouth had opened slightly. 40 seconds, he said, but his voice had changed. Sam pressed the connector home until it seated with a click he felt more than heard. He took a multi-tool from his pocket, the one thing of his own he'd brought. A habit. The way some men carry a pocket knife, and in 11 seconds he scraped the corrosion from the ground point and snugged it down clean. Then, he did the thing the computer would never do on its own. He reached in and cycled the ignition off, fully off, a beat, then on clearing the latched fault, telling the system, "Forget what you thought you saw. Look again. Try it now," Sam said, and stepped back, and stood up and put his hand on his son's shoulder. For 1 second, nothing happened. Vivian Hale's heart, which she would not have admitted was in her throat, fell, and then a staging crew member, at Anton's nod, pressed the start button. The Bugatti Chiron's 16-cylinder engine caught on the first turn and roared into the ballroom like something waking up offended, a sound that was not loud so much as total. A sound that occupied the room the way an ocean occupies a shore, that you felt in the floor and the champagne flutes and the fillings of your teeth, the sound of 8 years of swallowed knowledge announcing itself all at once. 300 people made a single sound. Anton Keller looked down at his stopwatch. It read 88 seconds. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he did something that no one expected, that Vivian Hale least of all expected, the factory's lead engineer, the most credentialed man in the room, turned the phone around so that the people near him could see the number, and he said, loud enough to carry, in the voice of a man telling the truth because the truth was the only thing left worth saying, 88 seconds. He looked at Sam. "How did you know where to look?" And Sam Mercer, standing in a borrowed suit with his hand on his son's shoulder while $4 million idled like a held note behind him, said, "Because I wrote the report that told you this would happen. 8 years ago." He paused. "You didn't read it." "That's all right. It was a long report." The car idled. Someone, mercifully, shut it off, and the sudden quiet was its own kind of loud. Vivian Hale was looking at Sam Mercer like a woman, looking at a word in a language she had spent her whole life pretending to speak. "You're an engineer," Vivian said. It wasn't quite a question. "I was." What happened? And Sam, who did not owe this woman his life story, who could have deflected, who had deflected 1,000 questions exactly like it from 1,000 people who had decided what he was by the building he worked in, looked at Vivian Hale's face and saw the hole still open under it and decided to tell her the truth. Not for Vivian, for the version of himself that had stood in this exact silence 8 years ago and been told the report was a non-issue. I worked controls integration, engine management, sensor systems, the logic that decides what a high-performance engine does. I found this failure, this exact one. A cheap sensor, a connector that works loose under vibration, a ground that corrodes, and a diagnostic that escalates a $30 problem into a catastrophic verdict because nobody taught it the difference. He shrugged, and the borrowed jacket moved wrong on his shoulders. I wrote it up. Recommended a fix to the logic and a better connector. Cost almost nothing. I was told the failure was too rare to spend money on. And then there was a restructuring. The people who wrote uncomfortable reports were rare too. A thin, tired smile. Apparently we were also too expensive to keep. Anton Keller had gone very still. Because Anton Keller, 26 years inside this world, knew exactly how true that story was. He had watched it happen. He had, perhaps in some meeting in some year, been one of the people who'd nodded when a rare failure was deemed not worth the cost. He did not say so, but his face said he was doing the arithmetic. I lost the job, Sam went on, and his voice didn't ask for anything, which was what made it land. Same year my son needed a new heart, and my marriage decided it didn't need me. I opened a shop. I fix cars. I'm good at it. He looked at the Chiron. I'm good at this one too. Turns out the language is the same in a strip mall as it is in a chartered jet. Leo, who had heard most of this story before in pieces but never all at once, and never in a room like this, slipped his hand back into his father's. It was Leo who broke the silence. He looked up at Vivian Hale, at the richest, most frightened person in the room, and he said, with the devastating plainness of a child who has not yet learned which truths you're allowed to say, my dad isn't expensive, but he's the best. And something in Vivian Hale, some load-bearing wall that had stood since she was 15 years old in a town that made things until it didn't, quietly came down. Because that was the lie. That was the whole lie of her life, said out loud by an 8-year-old and disproved by an idling engine. The best costs the most. What costs more is safe. She had built a fortune on it and bought a $4 million receipt to prove it. And tonight, the most expensive solution money could buy had failed, and a man in a borrowed suit had succeeded for free. And the wall between expensive and good, the wall Vivian had hidden behind her whole life, turned out to have been a curtain the entire time. The auction went ahead. It went ahead an hour late, with a story now attached to the car that no auctioneer could have scripted, the Bugatti that the factory called dead, and a single dad brought back to life in 88 seconds, and the room, which had arrived to bid on a machine, found itself bidding on a story, which is a thing rooms full of wealthy people will always pay more for. The Chiron sold for $6.2 million, every cent of it to St. Clair's Children's Hospital, to the cardiac wing, to the building Leo had wanted to see so that other kids wouldn't have to wait. Vivian found them near the coat check, while Sam was helping Leo back into a winter coat over the clip-on tie. She came without an entourage, which for Vivian Hale was itself a kind of confession. I want to do something for you, Vivian said. And I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. Because I've spent my whole life being the woman who throws money at things she doesn't understand so she doesn't have to understand them. She stopped. Started again, slower. And this was harder for her than any negotiation she'd ever closed. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to write you a check and feel better. I want to do the thing I should have done 8 years ago if my company had been the one that got your report. Sam waited. I want to hire you, Vivian said. Not to fix my cars. I have people for that, apparently not very good ones, but I have them. A breath of something that was almost humor. My company runs 1,100 vehicles, trucks, diagnostics, fleet logic, the systems that decide when something's really broken and when a computer is just crying wolf. I have spent millions on maintenance that I now suspect was solving $30 problems with engine-out invoices. I need someone who can tell the difference. I need someone who reads the reports. I have a shop, Sam said, and a kid. I'm not moving him. He just got his life back in this city. I know, Vivian said. I'm not asking you to. Consult from your shop. On your terms, your hours, around his school, around his Sundays. Keep the shop, I'll fund it if it helps, or I won't if that insults you. You decide. But let me pay you what the knowledge is worth, instead of what the suit makes people think it's worth. Sam was quiet for a while. He looked at Leo, who had found a tray of leftover desserts, and was conducting careful diplomatic negotiations with a waiter over a second one. He thought about the shop, and the slow, honest jobs, and the months that were tight. He thought about Leo's Sundays on the phone with a mother in another state. He thought about 8 years of being told, in 100 quiet ways, that what he knew didn't count because of where he knew it. One condition, Sam said. Name it. The report I wrote. The fix. The connector. The diagnostic logic. Sam's voice was level, but there was iron under it now. Your fleet has the same failure waiting in it. Somewhere. So does half the industry. I'll fix yours. But I want it written up properly. With my name on it. And I want you to make people read it this time. Not file it. Read it. Vivian Hale put out her hand. That, she said, I can do in less than 90 seconds. They shook, and Anton Keller, the factory engineer who had been standing back near the door waiting for a moment, stepped forward then and did the thing that mattered most to Sam of everything that happened that night, more than the job, more than the handshake, more than the $6 million. He gave Sam his card. When you write it up, Anton said, I want a copy. I'll make sure it reaches the people who should have read it the first time. He paused, and 26 years of professional pride bent, just slightly, into something more human. I ran that diagnostic twice tonight, because it felt too big. I didn't trust my own doubt. You did. That's the whole job, isn't it? Trusting the doubt. He nodded once, the way one craftsman nods to another. I won't make that mistake again. Sam and Leo drove home in the truck. Not a Bugatti. A 14-year-old pickup with 210,000 miles on it. An engine Sam kept perfect, because keeping engines perfect was who he was. In a strip mall or a ballroom or anywhere else, Leo was buzzing in the passenger seat, full of cider and dessert, and the particular electricity of a kid who has seen his father turn out to be exactly as large as he always believed. You fixed it in 88 seconds, Leo said. She said 90. You did it in 88. I had 2 to spare. Everybody saw. Everybody saw. Sam agreed. Leo was quiet for a mile. Then, in the dark of the cab, with the heater ticking and the city sliding by, he said the thing that Sam would keep. Were you scared when you walked over the rope? Sam thought about how to answer that honestly, the way he always tried to answer Leo honestly. Yes, he said. I've been scared of that rope for 8 years. But you did it anyway. I did it because you said I fix everything. Sam glanced over at him. I didn't want to be a liar in front of my own kid. Leo grinned, enormous, gap-toothed. Then he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, a cocktail napkin, it turned out, on which, sometime during the long evening, he had drawn an engine. 16 little cylinders. 4 little turbochargers, more or less, and along the side, low, near a bracket, a tiny arrow pointing to a tiny rectangle, labeled in an 8-year-old's careful capitals, the part nobody looked at. Sam looked at it at a red light, and had to look back at the road quickly, because his eyes had done something he didn't want his son to see them do. Can I keep this? He asked. It's for you, Leo said, like it was obvious. I made it for you. Sam put it in his jacket pocket, over his heart, next to nothing, because it was the only thing in there worth carrying. The light turned green. He drove his son home. There is a kind of knowledge that does not come with a certificate. It does not arrive on letterhead. It is not flown in on a chartered jet, or measured by the price of the building it works in, or validated by the title on a business card. It lives, instead, in the hands and the head of someone who actually did the work, who learned the language of a thing by listening to it for years, who knows not just the rules, but the exceptions, who can tell the difference between a symptom and a disease, because they have seen the disease before and watched everyone else mistake it for something fatal. We are taught, most of us, to trust the opposite, to trust the price tag, to assume that the most expensive answer is the safest answer, that the factory is always right, that the man in the perfect suit or the woman in the perfect gown knows more than the man in the borrowed one. And most of the time, the world lets us keep believing it. But every now and then a car dies in a ballroom full of people who paid for certainty, and the certainty fails, and from the edge of the room a voice says it's not an internal fault, and a man kneels down beside $4 million and fixes in 88 seconds what the best money could buy called Unfixable. Not because he was lucky. Because he knew. Because he had always known. Because 8 years ago he had written it all down and been told it didn't matter, and had gone on knowing it anyway. in a strip mall between a vape shop and a laundromat, waiting for a night that he had no reason to believe would ever come. Vivian Hale spent a lifetime buying the best of everything to prove she was no longer the girl from the town that made things until it didn't. It took an 8-year-old with a napkin and a cider to teach her the thing the receipts never could. That the best thing in the room that night could not be bought. It could only be recognized. And almost nobody recognized it until it spoke.